How do you see the correlation between financial incentives, the role of management, and ethical blindness?
There's a second element next to the toxic leadership that is decisive in scandals. That is how they manage incentives. And it's not only it's a very simple thing. You link financial incentives, the bonus, to just one goal. But Boeing, when they built these 737 MAX, which then crashed, the KPIs they had, which determined about the bonus, was speed and cost. So they had to develop the airplane as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. And that's what they did. So what financial bonuses very often do is they narrow down your vision. They put you in a tunnel so that you see this one goal and you have all that pressure, you must get there. You don't see the warning signals anymore left and right.
Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais um episódio do meu podcast Conversas com Propósito. Eu sou André Caldeira, sócio fundador e CEO do Grupo Proposito, bem como professor nos cursos de formação de conselheiros do IBGC. E esse é mais um episódio com um entrevistado em inglês. So I'll switch to English right away and introduce my very special guest today, Professor Guido Palazzo. Guido, please feel really welcome to my podcast, Conversas com Propósito, or in today's case, I should say, Conversations with Purpose.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce you properly, and then we'll start our chat. I recently finished reading The Dark Pattern, The Hidden Dynamics of Corporate Scandals, a book written by Professors Guido Palazzo and Ulrich Hofrich, who both teach at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. Right after finishing the book, I wrote an article about it on LinkedIn, to which Guido quickly reacted with a comment, which led me to invite him to be on my podcast. A few days later, I had the opportunity to watch him speak on PLV, a program organized by the Virtuous Company here in Brazil, owned by my friends Alexandre Di Michele and Angela Donaggio, who were both also interviewed here on the podcast last year. Guido Palazzo is a professor of business ethics at the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Lausanne, as well as a business advisor. He teaches and does research on the mechanisms of ethical and unethical decision-making in organizations. He has worked with numerous boards and executive teams of multinational corporations in Europe, the USA, and Asia on ethics and sustainability-related challenges, with over 100,000 managers worldwide having been trained with the Dark Pattern framework. Guido studied business administration as well as philosophy at the University of Applied Sciences in Worms and the University of Bamberg in Germany. He obtained his PhD in political philosophy from the University of Marburg, also in Germany. Guido is married to Bettina, who also works in the area of ethics consulting. And they have two boys, Emilio, 25, and Francesco, 20. It's funny, Guido, because my oldest is 24, my daughter is 20, and they're children to us all the time.
We have similar problems.
Yes. And in his free time, Guido loves to do hot yoga. So again, thanks for being here with us today. And we always start our episodes here with the same questions. Please share a moment, a part of your personal history that was fundamental to help define who you are today.
I think one moment that for me was super important is connected to the painting behind me. The two men that you see there are anti-mafia judges, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, who were killed by the mafia in 1992. And I remember how profoundly I was shaken by these two events, predictable events, and how it became important for me to speak up when I see things that I consider worth speaking up for, and to take them as my reminder to be courageous. That's why they are there every day. Because what they did was courageous. What we do is peanuts compared to what they did. Whatever it is we speak up about, it's always not as big and dangerous as we think.
Yeah, yeah. Where were you at the time?
I was driving in a car when I heard about the first of the two murders, and I was on the motorway, and I was crying when the news came in. So for me, it's like the fall of the Berlin Wall, or for elderly, the moment when the Americans went to the moon. So it was a defining moment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sort of like the good versus evil?
It is one of the, I was interested in organized crime, one of the topics I also devoted research on already as a teenager. And I had read the biography of Giovanni Falcone, the anti-mafia judge who was the first one who really disrupted Cosa Nostra in Sicily. So the whole topic of evil was always something I was fascinated by. And yeah, it determined in a way also my choice of research topics later.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's the time lapse between the judgment itself and when he got killed? In years, because there was the trial itself and then the killing. So what's the time lapse?
The trial was a few years before. I guess it was 1987, something like that. The Maxi trial where hundreds of mafiosi were sentenced.
Right.
I guess it was 87.
Mm-hmm. And then 5 years later,
in the late 80s, and that made him the enemy number one. Cosa Nostra.
I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a powerful moment. Thanks for sharing that. Which, of course, leads us to your book and everything you researched and wrote in this book. You actually wrote that corporate scandals are rarely caused by bad people, but by good managers caught in dynamics they fail to see and understand. You also wrote that context can be stronger than reason, stronger than values and morals, and stronger than the best intentions. Can you please expand on that?
When we look at corporate scandals, we read about them in the news. We normally have two knee-jerk reactions to that. First of all, we think it happens because there are some bad people who do bad things, which can be explained by their character. So we attribute it to their character. They are bad and therefore they act badly, whatever bad in that particular case will be. And the second reaction we show to these scandals is that we think about ourselves as good people. So we are by and large good people. Even most of us would think we are above the average good. And if you combine these two perceptions, us being good people and bad things done by bad people, we automatically assume that this would not happen to us because we're different. And Hollywood typically, and if you look at documentaries on scandals on Netflix, for instance, Hollywood narrates scandals along some evil people at the top of the company. And of course, there are very often evil people at the top of a company, psychopaths, aggressive, terrorizing leaders. But what we discuss in the book is not so much the behavior of the leaders, it's what's happening in the middle of the organization. Take the case of Boeing. You have hundreds of engineers working on the production of the 737 MAX, which then crashes because of quality issues. Or Volkswagen, you have, again, hundreds of engineers working on a new car with a filter technology where you program the board computer to manipulate the test of the car in the lab to simulate compliance with the law. Or take Wells Fargo, maybe the most extreme case. It's the biggest American bank, which at one point was engaging in systematic fraud of their own customers. So they were opening bank accounts for the customers with the electronic signature of the customers, but not telling the customers about it. They were just charging a fee for this product on their regular account, hoping the customer would not see it. And we know today that more than 100,000 salespeople participated, 100,000. So how do you explain that with character, right? What kind of company would hire only criminal salespeople? Or what kind of HR department would specialize in hiring just crooks? No, character doesn't explain behavior. And we know from social psychology that most of the time we do something, it is heavily influenced by the situation we are in. So that is how we analyzed the cases. We looked at the scandals with this question in mind. How is it possible that people like you and me, under certain circumstances, would do what they have done, and we would not even feel that what we do is wrong?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we think about the root causes of these cases and so many others, what would you bring as the most important ones?
Well, the question we asked ourselves when we looked into all these different scandals was, is there something they have in common? Because there are books on scandals, so that's nothing new or innovative. For each big scandal, there's at least one book that was published. But these books normally just narrate what happened. What we were doing is we were theorizing it. We were asking ourselves, is there a pattern across all these things? Is there something that happens again and again, so that we can compare the scandals, and not just compare them, but also make scandals predictable, to see it coming. And the book title is The Dark Pattern. So what it signals is we assume, we argue.
I have it here.
Thank you. We found a pattern of 9 repeating building blocks, as we call them, whom you find again and again in all these scandals. And just to highlight one of these 9 that I think is utmost important, all these companies have a climate of fear. So you have leaders at the top who terrorize people. Take Volkswagen again as this example. So Volkswagen had this big scandal, Dieselgate, where they were asked by the US government to reduce diesel emissions of their cars by 2/3. They were given 2 years. They could not make it. So the engineers faked it in the lab by using the software of the car for simulating compliance. Why did they not go to the CEO and tell him, Mr. Winterkorn, the name of the CEO, we have a problem, we cannot solve it? Well, because Winterkorn was a psychopath. And if I say psychopath, I have to be careful. I'm not claiming that he was a clinical psychopath, because we cannot know. But at least he was a behavioral psychopath. So he shows the behavioral features of a psychopath, which for the victims is no difference, whether you're clinical or behavioral, you suffer the same. So he would yell at people. He would throw stuff at them. He would angrily destroy car parts because he was not happy with the quality. He would fire people randomly. He had told his managers that the word problem is forbidden, because if you have a problem, it's just a sign that you are a bad manager. So you cannot go to this guy and tell him, we have a problem. There was an article published about him and his leadership style 2 years before the scandal happened in a German news magazine. And the article writes, Volkswagen is like North Korea minus the labor camps. So it's a horrible culture of pressure, of yelling, of humiliation, of obedience to authority. You cannot go to him and say, we have a problem, because that's the last thing you do in the company. And you know that. So you have fear. And that kind of fear that is created top down in the organization, you find in all those scandals.
Yeah. One of the things that caught my attention while reading the book is how little space there is for these kinds of bosses, because they're not leaders, to not hear bad news, to not deal with problems, which creates this environment of fear, of the mute button, in which you can't know the means to reach the goals. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, these leaders, they are convinced that their teams work better if you yell at them, if you threaten them, if you are rough. And they're probably not even convinced that they are bad leaders. I mean, there's an interview with Winterkorn, the CEO of Volkswagen, after the scandal, where he says, well, I always had an open door. I always listened to my people. So he probably was convinced I am a good boss. So the self-perception is often distorted in a way that they think what they do is maybe a bit rough, but okay, while the people suffer, and they suffer tremendously. So they lead with this pressure, and they are assuming that only my people will only move and achieve results if you treat them roughly. And maybe they come from a tradition where they themselves were treated like this in their own career, or they saw their own superiors doing these things, and they saw that it worked, more or less. So you copy this behavior. You think that leaders must be like that, because if you talk too long, if you discuss too much, if you let them do things their own way, then nothing happens. You must be authoritarian and strict. And then they are surprised very often if things go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's what we call the command and control, or carrot and stick model.
It was known that at Volkswagen, the whole culture was organized like in the army. You could not even speak with the superior of your superior. It was considered treason. You have to obey orders.
When we analyze the expression carrot and stick, talking about the carrot part, the financial incentives, how do you see the correlation between financial incentives, the role of management, and ethical blindness?
There's a second element next to the toxic leadership that is decisive in scandals, and that is how they manage incentives. And it's not only it's a very simple thing. You link financial incentives, the bonus, to just one goal. At Volkswagen, it was becoming number one in the world, to beat Toyota. If you want to beat Toyota, you really must enter the American market. To do that, you need this filter. So if you don't develop that filter and that team of engineers, you threaten the whole company's bonus. Or at Boeing, when they built these 737 MAX, which then crashed, the KPIs they had, which determined about the bonus, was speed and cost. So they had to develop the airplane as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. And that's what they did. So what financial bonuses very often do is they narrow down your vision. They put you in a tunnel so that you see this one goal, and you have all that pressure. You must get there. You don't see the warning stickers anymore left and right. Mm-hmm. And then there is what they also very often add, the negative incentives. You get punished if you don't achieve your goals. Right? There's this Gauss curve that they all apply since Jack Welch applied this for the first time at GE, General Electric, where he said, well, in every team, there are high performers, average performers, and low performers, and I don't want low performers. So he invented this system that every leader on every level of the organization had to fire 20% of their team every year. Regardless of performance, you can be the best performing team of the whole company. You must fire 20% of your team. That's the negative, the stick, the negative incentive. And they combine this very often. You have the positive one, it comes with a very narrow goal. And you have the negative one, which is you must be better than your colleagues. If you're not better than your colleagues, you're kicked out. So it's not about being good anymore. It's about being better than someone else. And that leads you to Hunger Games. So inside the company of Hunger Games, it's about literally killing my colleague. The CEO of Lehman Brothers, Richard Fuld, he used this expression saying you must cut the throat of your enemy. And the enemy was
the other movie, Highlander, or Hunger Games.
There can only be one. Yes, it's this kind of culture. It's not just you need to be good. I need to be so good that you get crushed, that someone else is kicked out, not me. Mm-hmm. So you fight for your life. It's decimation. And that's how the Roman emperors did this in their armies, right? If you want to punish the army for a little bit of disobedience, you randomly kill 10% of your soldiers. And then there's obedience again. So a little bit like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Jack Welch and GE management style. I learned on the book that the people from GE went to Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, with the M&A and the whole switch of a safety culture, engineer culture, to financial results and stock valuation priority. How can a company accommodate such different management styles? Because that's really a common thing that we see in M&A teams, right?
I mean, what you could see at Boeing is people coming in via McDonnell Douglas, so the company that was known for being ruthless, not caring much about rules, aggressive leadership style. You fuse them with Boeing, which is an old and a traditional and very proud engineering company where safety is an issue and it's important, it's a value. So you fuse them, and what happens is that the aggressive guys win. And there's this quote from one of these older Boeing engineers who said, well, they came and they went through us like a knife goes through butter. So they took over. And the people who were the leaders at the helmet of McDonnell Douglas were coming from Jack Welch. So 3 CEOs of Boeing in a row were former GE managers learning their job from Jack Welch. And Jack Welch had told them that you maximize profit by doing 2 things. First of all, you fire a lot of people. So you cut costs brutally. When Jack Welch became CEO of GE, he fired 25% of the people in the first 4 years. When Harry Stonecipher, coming from GE, became CEO of Boeing, he did exactly the same. He fired 25% of the people in the first 4 years, including many of the experienced engineers. The second thing you do when you want to maximize profit is you buy back your own shares. That's what they did at GE, and that's what they did at Boeing. So they invested their profit not in innovation, but in shares. Why do you do this? Well, if you buy your own shares, there are fewer shares, you neutralize them, and the stock value goes up. So you do 2 things that have nothing to do with innovation or substance or future. Cutting costs brutally and buying your own share, and the share value goes up. And your bonus goes up because your bonus is connected to the share value. But what you leave is a company that is no longer able to innovate safely. So you now have to build a new airplane, the 737 MAX, under that pressure. You have brutally cut costs. You have to develop it fast because Airbus was there with a new idea, new airplane. And the result is a badly designed and produced airplane that crashes twice within the first 6 months after the release. So you destroy the share value of the company by focusing so much on it that you don't think about anything else. That's a paradox of this story. And they all learned this from Jack Welch.
Not sure if this was on the book or somewhere else. I read an email that an engineer sent within Boeing saying, I would never put my family on a 737 MAX.
Yes.
Can you imagine? I show my students here at the Brazilian Corporate Governance Institute where I teach this part, which is really shocking because this is corporate governance. This is responsibility, accountability, and it all, right?
Yes, and there's this other quote from another engineer at Boeing who goes to his superior and says, we have an issue here of safety with this new airplane and we have to change something. And his superior says, well, before things change at Boeing, someone has to die. And that's what happened. And they still didn't change, by the way. So the same culture is there and the same problems. They didn't learn from this because they never looked at this as a kind of leadership or cultural challenge. They looked at this as a technical thing with some bad people who get fired and then everything is okay. Nothing is okay at Boeing.
That reminds me of Uber and the testimonial of this person who goes and complains about the boss and again, and then the HR says, well, maybe the problem is you.
Yes, you see this in a lot of these scandals. In any big scandal, at least one person is courageous enough to speak up. And it's always the same that happens. They get pushed back, they get demoted, they get kicked out, humiliated, yelled at. And they are told, you are the problem. That's the only problem here. Like this female engineer at Uber who starts to work there and gets sexually harassed by a boss the first day.
Is that Susan Fowler?
Yes, Susan Fowler. And she does the right thing. She goes to HR. And HR tells her, well, he's a high performer. We cannot do anything about him. He never did this before. But you can change teams. She changes teams. A new boss harasses her. She goes to HR, and HR tells her the same thing. He never did this before. He's a high performer. We cannot touch him, but you can change teams. She changes teams again. The third boss harasses her. She goes to HR again, and HR tells her, look, it's the third time that you come here with the same problem. Maybe you should ask yourself some questions about how you provoked this behavior. So that's very typical. You blame the victims. You silence them, or you find a reason to get rid of them, like at Wells Fargo. And there were 3 people who wrote emails to the CEO saying what we do is illegal. So this illegal bank account opening for customers without them knowing about it. They were all fired. Not for the email, of course, you cannot do that, but they were fired for being late 2 minutes in the morning. So you find something, you punish them. And the others observe that. You observe that people who speak up are in trouble. Do you want to be the next one being in trouble? No, you create a culture of silence so no one speaks up again.
Again, the issue of fear. No psychological safety, right?
There's so much fear in these companies and so much human suffering. And that is what we normally don't see. We see the software that doesn't work. We see a blood testing machine at Theranos that doesn't work. We see fraud, but we don't see the burnouts, the suicides, the people asking themselves all these questions about themselves where they consider themselves useless.
Yeah. That's really, really shocking when we read on the book about France Telecom and Foxconn, which is like, it seems like fiction. And it's happening, it happened recently, or maybe it's happening now somewhere else. It's
always happening somewhere.
That's why I think it's so powerful, the message you bring on the book. And that's why I invited you. I wanted to talk about boards of directors. There's a very interesting, interesting part of the book about context, in which you write that one person's action becomes the next person's context, and that context can be stronger than reason. And you proceed to state that when talking about bad apples, the problem is not the apple, but the barrel. So what's your take on the responsibility, the accountability of boards of directors?
All these companies have boards, right? And all these companies afterwards often wonder, why did we not see it coming? But there were warning signals that they might not have looked at because they didn't want to, or they couldn't because that was not the way they asked questions to their leadership team, right? Take the case of Wells Fargo, a bank that seems to be 4 times better than the others in selling products to customers, 4 times than any other bank. Why don't they ask themselves, how is that possible? How can we be 4 times better than anyone else with more or less the same people, more or less the same products, more or less the same procedures? Well, the reason is fraud, but they were just happy that they were 4 times better, and the share value went up and up and up. Same at Boeing. One cost-cutting program after another. Why is no one asking, well, don't we create the risks by cutting costs or producing more and more airplanes with ever smaller teams? No one asked these questions. So boards are very often not seeing these issues because they are cultural issues, and boards don't ask questions about culture. And boards nominate CEOs, right? So you can Google these people. You can find out, and you can ask the previous companies about them. You can find out who they are, how they behave, that they are yelling and threatening and creating this terror regime. They don't start this when they are hired a new company. They have done this before, right? But they don't ask these questions. They see, okay, this is a tough decision maker. We need this. We need someone who cleans the company now. Yeah, they clean it, but then what is left is often ruins, right? So boards need to learn to ask very different questions from what they are asking right now. And they have to consider, when they hire top managers, CEOs, have to consider these things. The biggest risk in insurance, CEO once said, the biggest compliance risk in a company is a charismatic CEO.
Right.
So don't hire these people.
Yeah. And do talk about culture, because culture is the water people swim in, or the air that they breathe in. I always say that whenever people, I know culture is an HR issue. We're all HR.
Yeah.
In boards, in top management positions. So
when I work with companies, very often when I start a workshop with a leadership team, I tell them the only reason why I am here is that you just paid 1 billion in fine or 2 billion in fine. Because before that, you thought that ethics has nothing to do with your job. Right now that you are in the mess, you understand that the absence of ethics is a problem. You could have saved these 2 billions if you had managed ethics proactively before.
Right.
But that's not what managers do. They think this is not my job. I don't have to manage ethics. And we have the compliance department. They take care of that.
Or maybe that this doesn't apply to me, to everybody else, but not me. You talk about in a part of the book that you were, I think, starting to work with a company in which the manager used to smoke in an area that was forbidden. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So sometimes it's very small things that signal to you that a person is very relaxed about rule following. In this case, it was a company that had a huge corruption scandal, and I was working with them afterwards, and they told me that the manager who instigated the whole scheme of corruption, so the mastermind of the whole thing, he was smoking in the office, but smoking was not allowed in the office. He was taking the liberty to do whatever he wanted in the office. So that signal is that rule does not apply to me. And if that rule doesn't apply, probably others don't apply either. You can also look at the fact that very often in a scandalized company, you have two parallel things that develop. You have sexual harassment cases and fraud or some other compliance issues. It's always both is there, because if people break one type of rules, they probably also break the other type of rules. So if there is a case of sexual harassment, I would always tell a company, dig deeper. There is certainly something else as well going on that you don't see because you only look at the harassment case. So you can read warning signals long before things come.
Mm-hmm. And do you get hired by companies that didn't go through corporate scandals, but they hire you as a strategy in order to prevent that? Does that happen? Or is always the case that, no, we had something really bad happening and we have to learn from that and change or try to change?
There are two reasons why companies might be interested in ethics and thus inviting someone who works on that and leadership team devoting time to that. The first reason is you are shocked by what happened in your own company, so you have to clean up. And the second reason is you have some enlightened people at the top. So some top managers who think that ethics is important, they drive the topic inside. Mm-hmm. That is rare, but it happens. It happens especially, I would say, in family-owned companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Going back to the building blocks of the dark pattern, one of the 9 is manipulative language. Expressions like kill the enemy, every day is a battle, or second best isn't good enough, which relate to war language. You also write about euphemistic language in terms such as creative accounting or exploring the loopholes. How can companies prevent this from happening in such dire times of tough competition, tariffs, short-term results, and economic challenges?
What managers need to understand is that the way they speak and the way their teams perceive the world and act in the world is always connected. So if you as a leader use war language, you create the impression that's often unconscious in your team that this is a war. And in a war, rules don't count, right? Because in a war, it's dirty. You have to ignore rules because otherwise you get killed and you don't want to be killed, right? the former CEO of Volkswagen, Ferdinand Piëch, who was also a psychopath, when they had another scandal, and they had hired the chief procurement officer of General Motors, who came not only with his team, but he came with 11 boxes of documents about the whole supply chain of General Motors, contracts, prices, everything, which is illegal. Piëch has to say something about it. He's the CEO at that time. He does a press conference. And in this press conference, he says, we are in a war. And in the war, there are winners and losers, and we want to be the winner. You see, imagine what that does with your team inside the company. You see a CEO who reacts to legal violations by saying, we are in a war. The signal that you send is, you can do whatever you want. You just have to perform, right? So the war language drives that. The euphemistic language drives that. Sectarian language drives that. So these arguments, we are changing humanity's destiny. Our CEO is the Messiah. We are the new economy. The others are the old economy. The current discussion in AI about transhumanism. So we fuse the brain in the machine. So all that nonsense, this science fiction type of language that liberates people from rule following. Because if you are the future and the others are the past, well, the rules are for the people in the past, not for you. So language does influence how we make decisions. And if you look at the language in a company, you can predict certain things because you can see how they speak and what kind of probability exists about certain behaviors. So war language drives unethical and illegal decisions.
This leads me to thinking about relationships. You write that financial incentives are associated with a reduction in empathy, compassion, and self-reflection. And obviously, they're related to creating action plans in which the means justify the ends. How can companies prevent from falling into these traps, but nonetheless offer fair incentives to management?
I would say in an ideal world, there would be no bonus. You would get a fair salary, one that is perceived by you as fair, by the company as fair, and you would do your job. There are companies like that. There's one example we discuss in the book. It's Handelsbanken, which is a Swedish bank. They have no bonus. They also have no quota for their salespeople because they say if we give them a bonus for a quota, they will sell stuff to people they don't need. We don't want that. We want to have good customer relations because we believe that this is how performance is created. The bonus is not necessarily leading to better performance. It might lead you to just sell at any price because you have all the other pressures we mentioned already. So the fear, for instance, right? You have to sell like crazy. You don't care about customers. You borderline cheating at one point because you have to sell and you want this bonus, right? So the bonus, if I would have a magic stick, I would just abolish all bonuses in the world and say, give people a stable, fair income and they will do their job.
But most companies do actually offer bonuses, right? So how can a company cope with ethics and at the same time keep offering a strong bonus offering?
I think if you offer bonus, what you need to understand is that this bonus should not be paid for a too narrow objective, right? If it's just maximizing sales, if that is your bonus, you as a person, you maximize your own sales, then do not be surprised if bad stuff happens under pressure. But if you also include ethics, for instance, in the bonus, which I would highly recommend, then people get a broader perspective of what they are supposed to do, right? So if there are companies, for instance, who link the bonus to managers' willingness to engage their teams in ethical conversations. You have to do this 3, 4, 5 times a year, and if you do this, your team confirms that. That's part of your bonus. I'm not a big fan of doing that because you should do it because you want to, not because you want more money. But if you have bonuses, then you should connect the bonuses to a broader set of criteria that just maximize your sales.
A more systemic approach, which goes back to the barrel and the responsibility of boards of directors, right? Which appoint the CEO
Yes, they can see that. And if you take a case we don't have in the book, it happened too late, the collapse of Credit Suisse, the big Swiss bank. The amount of money they paid for bonuses over a 10 years period before the fall was bigger than the profit they made. Imagine that. So they pay more bonus than they make profit, while their share value goes down over all these years. So suddenly the bonus is completely disconnected from performance. People just look at their bonus and they do whatever it takes to get a higher bonus next year, whatever their performance. So bonuses are easily getting out of control and pushing people into behaviors the company probably don't want them to behave like.
Yeah. I just thought of the recent outing of Nestlé's worldwide CEO, which has not to do with financial incentives, but with lying, not really telling the truth about some sort of relationship with somebody that worked with him. How often do you get to see this, which is not related to money, but to, personal involvement or the lack of ethics in terms of not speaking the truth or not following the policies of company?
It's an interesting case because it shows something we discuss in the book as another building block of the dark pattern, one that we call ambiguous rules. So rules are not clear. Rules are not clear in the sense that there are official rules that are the same for everyone, but it seems that for certain people, other rules count, or violations of certain rules are okay as long as they are either powerful or performing or both, right? So if you are CEO, in this Nestle case, you have the right to have a love affair with someone who is your direct report. So the problem is not the love affair. The problem is the mix of power and private issues. You might not necessarily abuse that power, but just the fact that you can abuse that power and that you have the right to do these things signals to everyone else around you there's special rules for our CEO. And then I see this in a lot of companies, that there are special rules for high-performing salespeople. If they break rules, we close an eye. Like the Uber story that I mentioned. Arrest, but the man is protected because he's performing. No one touches the high performers because you want their performance. But the signal you send to the others is always the same. The signal is people who perform, for them, rules are more flexible. And if you start interpreting one rule under pressure and fear, of course you start sooner also to bend other rules, because rule bending as such seems to be okay. The company opens a zone of gray in which everybody somehow does what they want depending on how they interpret the situation. And that is a key driving force of corporate scandals. So it's good that Nestle could stop this, and they stopped it because of their own internal speak up system. So people spoke up and the problem was solved, in contrast to the other cases in our book where people spoke up and they were just silenced.
Right. Yeah, which has a link to the tone at the top, right? Because imagine if the CEO is doing this and not telling the truth and thinking that it doesn't apply to him. To me, that reminds me of the distortion field of Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and okay, what you're saying does not apply. We're doing this, and they start to believe in their own lies. Which is crazy.
Right. You are the reference point of people if you are the CEO.
Right.
And the way you speak and the way you act is taken as the example for the others. Right. And that is the case for Holmes at Theranos, for Neumann at WeWork, for Winterkorn at Volkswagen. Whatever you do is taken as a yardstick. And if you break the rules, you signal to the others, I want you to break the rules as well. You just have to perform. So you bend reality for the others, not just for yourself. You fake something, like in the case of Theranos, the blood testing machine that didn't work. You fake it in public, but you you are charismatic enough to convince your own people that faking is okay because you will make it sooner or later, right? So you are all participating. It's this big collusion that happens across a company because you trust your CEO or you are fearful of your CEO. Normally it's a mix. It's charisma. You are inspired, but you also have fear because there's yelling and there's humiliation and there is punishment. So it's always both, right? It's this mix, and you feel uncertain about what to do, what to believe, and you hope she's right.
Yeah.
You keep going.
And these people surround themselves with followers who do not go against whatever they're doing, thinking, so the distortion gets bigger and bigger, or no bad news, and this is the way we do, which has a link in my perception to the dangerous groups, especially at the tone at the top.
We know from research that everyone wants to be surrounded by people who are like me. And that's somehow normal. We think we are good people, so we want others to be like us, so it's easier to communicate, they're similar, there's no misunderstanding because they're like me. And the same is true for psychopath. Psychopath wants to be surrounded by psychopath. They think I need team members who yell like I yell so that their teams perform. And that is what you can see in a lot of these companies like Boeing. You pull the next guy up who is like the previous guy. At Volkswagen, you have Pirch, who is horrible as a leader. He pulls up Winterkorn, who is like him. So we create these structures in which the wrong people repeatedly go up in the hierarchy. And it's easier for them to go up because if you are a psychopath, you're ruthless, you take risks, you don't care about others. At the same time, you are often charismatic. So you are, as a narcissist, able to make others feel they're the center of the universe. So it's this mix of abusing and yelling and charming people, and the randomness of all that that makes them move up. And they're very good in playing political games behind other people's backs. So if you hesitate too much, they're already ahead of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the dark triad, right? Narcissists, psychopaths, and Machiavellian people.
Yes, so they are not feeling other people's emotions. They are ruthless psychopath. They are charming but self-interested only, narcissist, and they're good in playing games behind people's back, Machiavellianists.
Right. Which, in my opinion, really works for the power and the importance of diversity in boards of directors and in top management positions, because you have to learn from the different perspective. And that's why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I think the lack of alternative perspectives plays a key role when you have teams of leaders who all look the same, think the same, speak the same language. They don't challenge each other anymore. And they don't have alternative worldviews. They're all the same. And then they're surprised if something goes wrong because they couldn't see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Diversity is the answer, certainly.
Another very interesting expression I read in the book is about the Darwinism of purpose, related to the acquisition of Zappos by Amazon. Do you believe that organizational culture can thrive in M&A scenarios, mergers and acquisitions, especially in the case of companies who get acquired? Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to see that sometimes big companies buy small companies that are known for their ethical culture, probably hoping that somehow this culture will then infect the whole bigger company and at least reputation-wise, so that we will be perceived as a more ethical actor because we bought this super ethical small company. Ben & Jerry ice cream and Unilever, for instance, right? Or Zappos and Amazon. But if you have a cutthroat culture and you buy the ethical company, what happens in the end is that you swallow it and it becomes like you. Right? So you destroy that culture if you don't let them flourish and do what they have done so far and what makes them the ethical company. And Subway is such a story where you had a culture that was I would say, a role model culture of how you lead, how you interact with each other, how you evaluate, how you measure performance. And they was just squeezed through the Amazon way of doing things, which is Darwinistic, which is fire people who are low performers, evaluate constantly who is doing what and how good or bad they're doing it, giving them a bonus based on that. So all the things that we already discussed, you squeeze the ethical company through that and you kill the culture quickly. Ethical cultures are easy to kill.
Yeah. And talking about whistleblowers, we see that they face big challenges such as retaliation, professional isolation, psychological distress, sometimes family impact, and diminished career prospects. How can companies do better to protect and value whistleblowers?
First of all, I would differentiate between two different things. I would differentiate between speaking up and whistleblowing.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking up is what people do inside the company. So I go to my boss and I say, what we do is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Stop that. Whistleblowing is what people do normally after they have repeatedly tried to talk about a problem internally and no one was listening, or they were even threatened and silenced. Some of them then go public and they inform the media or they inform the government about ethical and legal issues inside the company. That's what you don't want as a company, right? Because this is trouble. But it is the natural result of not listening to those who speak out internally early on when problems occur. So what companies need is a culture of speaking up. What we as societies need is a way of protecting the whistleblowers. The Americans have a quite nice system, at least in some industries, where the whistleblower receives a percentage of the fine the company must pay for the wrong behavior. So at least financially they are safe. Most of them don't find a job anymore. They suffer. They are outcasts. No one wants to hire a troublemaker, right? So they struggle. So
it's funny. The troublemaker is the whistleblower and not the people who committed the fraud in the companies, right?
But it's human. We want to be informed about problems, but we don't like the person doing it, right?
You kill the messenger.
Yes. And that's especially important in these tough cultures that we just discussed, where you have obedience, you have group conformity, where sticking out with some alternative thinking is a threat to the group. You don't want threats to the group. Imagine the person in the professional cycling world at the time of Lance Armstrong, who took EPO, a drug that gives him more performance, to win the Tour de France 7 times. If you are a team member who starts to speak about drugs, you are an outcast. You are a threat to the whole, not only to your team, you are a threat to the whole system. We hate people who are a threat to the whole system, so we spit them out. And they struggle afterwards. But if whistleblowers struggle, it means that we don't have good role models, right? Why would I be the next one doing that if I know that this is so risky? So we need anti-retaliation policies in society to protect them. But we also need anti-retaliation policies inside companies to protect people who speak up against their own superiors, so that everyone else around me, my company, sees there was this person speaking up, she's protected.
Yeah.
So I can also speak up next time.
Very, very important point. In the last part of the book, you write that a rigid shareholder value ideology, one that provides fertile ground for monsters to grow, is the real scandal. What do you mean?
One of the building blocks of the dark pattern is what we call rigid ideology. So it's this thinking that we teach in business schools around the world since decades. We say you must maximize profit. That's your only ethical responsibility. The market will regulate itself. So government regulation is really bad. Humans are egoistic, and the world is competition. So that's what we teach. And if you believe in that, well, then you maximize profit at any price, as we have seen at Boeing, at Volkswagen, and all these other cases. You consider markets like cutthroat competition, and you fight and you kill. And then, so you live that ideology. And you think that governments are bad, so you have to cheat on rules. You have to pressure them not to regulate you too much. Just think about this one piece of information. Boeing was self-certifying 97% of the Boeing 737 MAX, self-certifying. So the regulator didn't have enough people to do the regulator job. So they were asking Boeing engineers to check the quality of the work of other Boeing engineers and send the information to the regulator. We shouldn't be surprised if that doesn't work, because this is so shut through with contradictory interests. You will always decide in favor of the company if you are in that role. So self-regulation doesn't work. We need regulation. In all these cases, failure of control by governments plays a key role. So the monster, in a way, is the system that is designed in a way that companies have short-term profit maximization goals, and they do this in an uncontrolled and untamed way because we don't have sufficient regulation. This ideology, which we teach in business schools, which companies live and execute, that is probably the real monster. If we want to avoid corporate scandals, one of the key things we might want to do is to stop the profit maximization system.
Yeah. When I got my MBA in class of 2000 at the Anderson School, UCLA, second year, my electives, I picked lots of HR classes because I was interested in leadership and relationships in the corporate scenario and all that. That's why I ended up working and doing what I do today. And at the time, my peers used to, why HR? Have to do finance, operations. So it was all about profit maximization and probably leaving outside the how and the who. So I can't help but, agree with you 100% because I think this is so critical.
And just think about how we teach strategy. We teach Michael Porter, 5 forces.
Right.
Porter, just the theory is very simple. It says you are surrounded by enemies.
Yes.
Your customer is your enemy. The government is the enemy. Your competitor is the enemy. They all want something from you, and you have to shield your company against what they want. Fight them, and you will win. So this kind of thinking, you'll find it in all these companies out there who then start to cut corners because, after all, they're fighting, right?
Yeah. Right. And if you add that part of the education with the expectations of the financial market, you have lots of traps. And
for that, the markets, they wait for new success stories every 3 months.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And stock value maximization, right?
It has to be going on and on and on. You need to be better and better and better. And this is also a key element of all these scandals. You can have the dark pattern, so this horrible culture, this bad leadership, and nothing happens. You still don't break the law. The reason why some companies start breaking the law is their success story is stuck. They need to do something about it. They cannot tell the public that there's a problem. And you as a manager inside, you cannot go to your CEO and say, there's a problem. You must keep the good story going. And then you start to cut corners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is the scandal that impacted you the most while researching for and writing the book?
This is clearly the France Telecom story, where I had sleepless nights when I was reading the court document. So this is a company, a French company that is privatized and was a state service until 1999. It's privatized. But when they get privatized, the government and the unions have negotiated that the people working there, which is a special thing in Europe, I guess, are civil servants. They cannot be fired. So in 2005, a new CEO arrives, Didier Lombard, and he is under pressure to perform. The stock value had gone down. He has too many people, and he has the wrong people. He needs software engineers. He needs people who can do mobile telephone technology or internet technology. He needs that, but what he has is old technicians. So people who go to households and install telephones. He has thousands of those he doesn't need anymore. He tells his team, we have to get rid of 22,000 people in the next 4 years, and I don't care whether they leave through the door or through the window. And then they start making pressure on people they want to get rid of so that they voluntarily leave the country.
They have to decide themselves to leave, right?
Yes, you must convince them to leave. So what they did was they created very unpleasant situations at work for them. For instance, you cannot be fired, but you can be moved across France. Must be a civil servant. You must take the job they give you. So they move you far away from home. You arrive in a new working place and you are asked to sit in a room and wait for your mission. That's how they call it. There's just a chair in this room. There's nothing else. And you sit and wait. Wait the whole day. No one comes. You wait the next day. No one comes. You wait a week, a month, 2 months, and so on. Many months. You wait and no one comes to give you something.
It's like a torture chamber.
Yes. But you have to come, because if you don't come, they give them a reason to fire you. Right? So, and the idea was that if we create unpleasant work situations for the ones we want to convince to leave the company voluntarily, they will do so. And then what they had was a wave of suicides where people killed themselves. Almost 100 suicides in 3.5 years. They were killing themselves in a meeting with HR. They were burning themselves on the parking space of the company, jumping from the roof, hanging themselves at home in the uniform of France Telecom. Horrible stories. As the result of all the pressure. So company cultures are always toxic in all these cases, but this one was so toxic that people thought it's even better to die than to live like that.
That's really, really shocking. Can't resist to comment on Wells Fargo and the scenes you describe in the book, that you have people crying by your side because of the pressure, and you don't react. So it's sort of like a dehumanizing process. And also, there's no break for bathrooms. So it goes to such extreme examples that threaten the psychological aspect, but also life, as you mentioned, to France Telecom scandal.
It's not only France Telecom, also, as you said, in Wells Fargo. Right? So you have in all these companies so much pressure on people. And there's this one statement from a former Wells Fargo salesman who said after the scandal, I have been fighting as a soldier in the Iraq War in 1991. And I must say that working for Wells Fargo is worse. Imagine that. You fight in the war and you think the company culture actually is worse than fighting in the war. That is a good example of the culture that sometimes companies create. It's a horrible culture where people on Sunday evening have stomach pain when they think about Monday worship, cry on the toilet, as some of these people said, or they are humiliated and yelled at in an open space because they don't achieve their quota. So horrible stuff. And it's more often happening than we think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these are tough subjects and examples, horrifying stories, but we have to learn from them and do something about it. That's why I think there's a strong link with purpose in terms of leaders, in terms of members of boards, in terms of companies. And that's why I wanted to invite you. I wanted to change the path a little bit. And before going to the next part of our conversation, ask you, what advice would you give, with all the experience you have today, to the young Guido back then when you were like 20-something years and were starting your career?
But I don't think that I would tell myself to change something. I guess I'm pretty happy with the development that came later. Maybe I would tell myself start with yoga 20 years earlier.
But if you could, would you do something different? Like in terms of, I don't know, facing problems or dealing with the unexpected?
I wanted to study archaeology when I was at school, and I didn't dare to do it. I didn't have the courage to do it for a simple reason. There were no jobs for archaeologists at that time. Probably today there are no jobs for archaeologists either. Today I would tell myself maybe follow your passion. I mean, I'm still happy with what I achieved, and being a philosopher was also fine, but my own sons, I tell them this as well. If you are passionate about something, don't care about jobs, just do it. You will find something. You will find a job. Do what you think is meaningful for you. So maybe I would also have been a great archaeologist today. Who knows? Maybe not.
Yeah. Alain de Botton, he talks about, happiness in the job market or in work has a direct connection to talent, skills, which you developed, and something that's needed in the world that's going to present you with money. So you need, of course, compensation, but you have to be able to develop your skills and find space to express your talents.
I studied, or I did my PhD in business ethics in the late 1990s, and there was no market for business ethics. This is long before all these big scandals happened. There was no compliance. There was nothing. Mm-hmm. In a way, it was also a bit risky to specialize in ethics. Even in the academic job market, there was one opening all over the place in the countries where I would consider to work in business ethics. And I luckily got this position. Otherwise, I would have been forced to do something else, right? Sometimes it's better not to think about consequence, just to do what you think is interesting and passionate about.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm now going to switch to the common questions I have to all my guests here at the podcast. Okay. So please answer as candidly as possible these questions. Complete the following sentence. Purpose is?
Purpose for me is the ability to find something that is meaningful for the world, makes a contribution to the world, but it's also meaningful for yourself. So this combination, if you find that sweet spot, you have good purpose.
Mm-hmm. 2 or 3 words that help define your own personal purpose.
Always have a plan B. Think about alternatives to what you do, because what you do might not continue, might not end well, so you need plan B. If you don't have plan B, you are a slave of plan A. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about a guiding figure in your life? Parent, teacher, mentor? Why do you mention this person, and what have you learned from them?
Well, I have to come back to what I said at the beginning. These 2 judges behind me profoundly influenced me. And what I learned from them is we all have to be courageous. We have to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Is there a connection with hope in this example you're giving us? Like hope for a better world, hope for justice, hope for ethics?
Desmond Tutu once said, "I am the prisoner of hope." And I like that. We might be pessimistic about the future, but we still have to hope. Whatever the outlook is, we have to hope. There's no alternative to hope.
And would you have any unbelievable or very funny story you went through in your career that you could share with us today? We all have those, something that you would not believe what happened to me, or something really funny. Any particular stories you could share?
Well, maybe not in my professional life, but in 1996, I went to a conference on business ethics. I was a young PhD student, and my future wife went to the same conference. And when she entered the room, I looked at her and I knew I would marry her. And that's what I told her on the second day of that conference, and then we married.
Did you really?
My age was my future wife.
Bettina, right? So what was her reaction when you said that?
She was, we discussed to marry, but for her it was just a joke, fun. But for me it was serious. So she found this playful, and I was convinced that this is going to happen. And I could not convince her of that as well.
That's love at first sight for real, huh?
Yes, for me at least. For her, not so much.
You had to convince her.
Was not so difficult, but it took a few weeks, yes.
Okay. If you could invite anyone in the world, living or dead, for a meal and a good conversation, who would they be and why?
I always show my students a drawing of a meeting of 4 people in 1797. And these 4 people are Goethe and Schiller, so the pre-romantic poets, and Humboldt brothers, so Alexander and Wilhelm von Humboldt, who were genius scientists in that time. I want to sit on that table. I want to listen to, engage with them. That is, if I had a time machine, I would travel there. And
Would love to be invited for that table as well. You mentioned archaeology. Any other line of work or career you could have had?
I was always passionate about history. Archaeology was one of the options, but studying history would have been something I would also have imagined as something to be passionate about. So I could also have been a historian, not a philosopher. But all these topics are so close to each other. If you're a philosopher, you need history. If you're a historian, it's also philosophy. So I'm at least a hobby historian today.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you were born in Italy, right?
I'm born in Germany.
Oh, in Germany. Okay. And then what was the opportunity that led you to Lausanne in Switzerland?
I was, so I'm half Italian, half German. I grew up in Germany. My father is Italian, my mother is German. So I'm second generation immigrant in Germany. And I finished my PhD in 1999, and I was looking for a job. I didn't want to go directly to university.
Okay.
And I was a business ethics student, which that didn't exist at the time. I thought I need some credibility from practical experience, and I have to get this fast. So I have to become a consultant. So I took a job as a consultant in Switzerland. So I moved to Switzerland and stayed since then. In 1999, I arrived. Now I'm Swiss. So.
So directly in Lausanne, you moved to Lausanne?
I went to the German part of Switzerland first, St. Gallen.
Okay.
Started there.
Mm-hmm. What is the best or the worst piece of advice you ever received?
Well, I've published some research in my early years in American journals, like the American Academy of Management Review, which then led me to get tenured and being cited and discussed. And a colleague who read my article, the one that was then, I would say, my most cited article, recommended me not to send it to a journal because it was not good enough. So I ignored it. I still have that email and kept it for me. I ignored it. No, this is good enough. So I ignored her bad advice and I deleted it.
That's amazing. Glad you didn't follow his advice. What question would you have for me in our conversation?
I mean, you know the corporate world well, and you have read The Dark Pattern. Did you see these things in your own professional career happening around you?
Unfortunately, yes. And I still see it. And here on the podcast, I always try to bring, like we're trying to share light and good examples. But in this case, talking about scandals, we have to face them. We have to learn from them. Otherwise, you go to the utopia direction.
Yes.
So that's why I said it's going to be great to have Guido here. And what I see in companies and I saw in my career is that you're you face some situations in which you have to think, okay, what am I about to do here? What are my options? And of course, it's not always your call, but it is your call to stay or to leave. So I think I would start with that. Brazil has plenty of scandals, as so many other countries. And what I think we have to is to study more about the importance of corporate governance and leadership.
Yes.
Which is different than management. And we have to do our part. I have to do my part as you're doing your part in order to, expand this message, because it's our personal call. I want to be part of what? Team, company, and society. And I could always say, no, this is the government, this is the economy, this is how things get done. Or I could look myself in the mirror and be responsible for my own choices. I always say that sustainability starts in the mirror. Because if you're a brilliant thinker, you could, perhaps make a dent in the world. But if you don't take care of yourself, your life is going to be really, really shorter. So it's about the body, the mind, the spirit, and then you connect to people who are brighter than you so that you can, try to impact society. That's how I see it.
If more many people would think like that, we wouldn't have written that book, because there wouldn't be enough stories.
Talking about other books then, please mention a book that was really important to you and the reason for mentioning it.
One of my favorite novel writers is Elena Ferrante. It's an Italian writer. We don't know exactly who it is because it's anonymous.
Oh.
So the name is not her real name. But when I was reading her books, it's a series of books starting with one book called My Brilliant Friend.
A Brilliant Friend, Elena Ferrante.
Amica Geniale in Italian. And it's the first time that I was reading a book and I was understanding that women write differently from men. This was a story from a female perspective, and that this perspective was not the same as the perspective that you get when a man writes a novel. So for me, it was eye-opening to see her writing novels. And since then, I'm more sensitive for the background of people, the diversity of backgrounds of people who write novels, and how you see that diversity expressed.
Through the lenses.
Exactly.
And what struck you the most in her way of writing?
I think she was much. This is a story about a friendship of two women. She accompanied them across various volumes of that story, from childhood to older age. It's a very complicated relationship, but if you have a male author, you don't get the same kind of intimacy relationship, the same kind of view of the world. So you see the male and aggressive and macho-like society in which they grow up in South Italy through the perspective of these two girls and then women as victims, as people try to survive and play and succeed in a world that is rough because there are all these men. So that is what I learned by reading.
That's very interesting. Again, the diversity of perspective, right?
Exactly.
Beautiful. If you had magical powers for 1 minute and could change one single thing in the world, what would it be?
I would say I would create a world in which we treat not only other human beings, but any other fellow beings, be it a forest, be it a dolphin, with respect and dignity.
Very important thing. Thinking about the future generations, not as an exercise of ego, but of legacy. For what would you want to be remembered if you are by the next generations? Guido was a person who, Professor Guido Palazzo, was somebody who
didn't care about his legacy. What
do you mean?
I think we are so quickly forgotten if we die. Just if you look into history, all the people who lived and how quickly they disappeared from the awareness of other people. There's no legacy. When very few people, if you're Einstein, you might leave a legacy, but us normal mortals, one generation and we are gone. We are not even faint memory. We are nothing anymore. So do the right thing here. Don't focus on your legacy, because it's important what's happening right now, not what's happening.
Is there a connection in this answer to the courage you mentioned in the beginning? Speak up, no matter what.
Yes, but maybe it's also this fact that I don't like to be so much to be in the center of something. I want to focus on topics, stories, learnings, not on talking about myself. So I don't want others talking about me when I'm gone. They should talk about the right topics. That's more important.
But they'll truly be talking about the book.
At least as long as I live.
And could you share a quote or a message that's important in your life for us to finish this conversation?
There are two things I tell my students, and that's based on this experience with these stories that we put down in the book. The first one is this sentence I mentioned already: you need a plan B. If you have no plan B, you are the slave of plan A. So that's one thing. The other thing is, it's maybe that, is do no harm and take no shit. So do not treat others without respect, and do not let others treat you without respect. Speak up if it happens. So if this is how we would lead others, we could avoid a lot of the trouble that we describe in the book, The Dark Pattern.
Courage and respect. Guido, thank you so much for your time. This was amazing, and I'm sure people are going to love it. Thank you. You were really, really generous and open to this invitation across the world from this crazy Brazilian guy who has this podcast. Thank you so much. Kudos to you. And Ulrich, how do I pronounce his name? Ulrich Hofrich?
No, Ulrich Hofrage.
Oh my God, that's going to be so hard for me. So, but kudos to you. This is a great book. Again, people, The Dark Pattern, The Hidden Dynamics of Corporate Scandals. Please read and study this book. Very important message. Guido, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for your time, active listening, and audience. If you like this episode, please press like, make a comment, or share. Together, let's create deeper dialogue, stronger purpose, more inspiration. See you guys soon. Thank you. Obrigado.